Is this thing on? Hello, welcome to the Tilehurst podcast, a podcast by Reading fans for Reading fans. Reading Football Club is a professional football team based in Reading, Berkshire, founded in 1871. I think. It's been a while. I think I'm still Marc and this is still the Tilehurst podcast, and we have some football to talk about, which is pretty nice. And welcome back, everyone. It's been a long time, really, since we've had a football game to talk about. We've had some interviews in the interlude period between, March and that Birmingham win, which feels like an absolute age away. But welcome to the Tilehurst podcast, and joining me to talk about Reading's beautiful return to football, although we won't be able to be in the stadium for it, are three of the finest Reading minds that we at the Tilehurst have to offer. And really, it's a blast from the past in one respect, because Will Jones is joining us this week. And Will, you're someone who wrote, for those who've been reading the Tilehurst website for a long time, you wrote for stats pieces and all sorts back in the day, and you actually left us to go and move abroad. And this is, I suppose, why you're the perfect person to be speaking to this week, because you are, you're the sort of fan that we have to ask, how do we do it? How do we watch Reading just on TV now?
Thanks for that introduction, Marc. I mean, it feels so long ago, that the beginning of the lockdown, that me writing regularly for the Tilehurst doesn't feel that much longer in the past. In terms of we're all going to be watching it on iFollow, or if any games are on Sky. My two sort of quick tips are: one, iFollow is actually not always a very easy website to work out. I've been caught up a few times trying to set it all up 5 minutes before kickoff, and then what you want to avoid is what happened with me with the Fulham home game at the beginning of the season, where I think it took me 10 minutes to actually be able to buy access to the game. And then by that point, we were 1-0 down. And then another 10 minutes for me to fix it up to my TV, by which point we were 2-0 down and a man down. So it sounds like I'm treating you like idiots, but it's worth looking at it in advance. And then the second one is, I think we're all guilty of this when we watch games at home or even in the pub, of sort of following it on Twitter. You will, if you check the Reading FC hashtag on Saturday, you will see people commenting, and they are clearly behind the action. And I've certainly had a few times where the game's gone a bit quiet, and I've checked Twitter and seen that there's been a goal, and it's been 2 minutes after I've watched it. So if you want to sort of avoid that, then I would recommend just staying off Twitter whilst the game's in play.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. For the Tilehurst Twitter, maybe we'll be doing it on a delay, depending on which of us is operating it. So things are going to be a bit out of sync. And Simeon, pick up the Tilehurst editor. You join us as well, mate. How's it been these last few months?
Pretty good, thanks. It's kind of a weird feeling, having been at the Birmingham game all those months ago and just not having any idea that we wouldn't be here until, well, a couple of months later. So it's been odd. It's been a bizarre experience, but delighted to finally be back belatedly.
And Olly, you've been squirreling away, as I suppose I as well, with the podcast interviews in the period. And you've been in, I suppose, which of the people that you've been speaking to have been really memorable sort of chats for you?
Yeah, it's been good. It's kept me busy, certainly. I think, I've spoken to some really, really interesting guys. Rob Dickey, Nigel Gibbs, Andrew Zolderink, Nelson Oliveira, all great people to speak to. I think probably my favourite out of those lot might well have been Rob Dickey, just because he spoke so well about his time at Reading, and obviously there's been links about him potentially coming back. He wasn't going to comment too much on that, but certainly from speaking to him, and he still feels he has sort of unfinished business, I think was the term that he used about Reading, and certainly speaking to him, he's got a passion for the club, so it made me want him back more, I think. But yeah, no, all great guys to speak to, and certainly kept me busy these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure with a few of the players that I've spoken to as well, and ex-players and everything on the Tilehurst website and on the podcast as well. We've got plenty of interviews. We've got written interviews, as Olly mentioned, with Rob Dickey, Jason Roberts, Sammy Free Johnson, Aaron Tishbola and Nelson Oliveira, all getting a chat to Tilehurst people on the website. On the podcast as well, Graham Murty, Tom McIntyre, Casper Scorks, Nigel Gibbs, Andres Alderink and Simon Church, all featuring. So hopefully plenty to have kept you busy, certainly plenty to have kept us busy over the last few months. And we'll jump into Newsbites in a second. But beforehand, as always, a massive thank you to our sponsor, ZCZ Films. I suppose in a way, they've got more perhaps more airtime and more time than they perhaps bargained for. So I suppose it's a good deal all round in that sense. And of course, our Patreon campaigners as well for, in these darker times, as it were, to be able to put in some cash out of your own pocket and into our virtual tip jar is always appreciated. Before we move on to Newsbites as well, I just wanted to put out a couple of messages. Firstly, as hopefully we're gradually and hopefully moving out of this pandemic, I wanted to extend a huge tireless and thank you to all of the NHS staff for your work over the past few months. The actions of healthcare workers save lives every day, but never has it been so vivid just how important they are. And every key worker from shop staff to delivery drivers to public transport operators deserves our huge gratitude. And the tireless STEM would also like to add its voice in supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. Greater racial equality in football and media is absolutely essential, and seeing Reading players such as Danny Loader and Gareth McCleary write truly heartfelt messages on the topic, as well as many, many Reading fans, shows that we as a club must do what we can, and the Tilehurst End, as a voice for Reading fans, wants to stand alongside them and will continue to do so.
Be loud and be proud and back the boys and make some noise. Come on, you Oz!
Shout out to this week's podcast sponsor, ZCZ Films, showing that age is no barrier to being a hula hoop.
Right, so where do we pick up? With Newsbites, I've thrown this to the start of the episode, guys, because there's, I suppose, been a lot of time for news, really. The furloughing of the under-23 players, or some of the under-23 players, and pretty much all of the women's team has been undertaken in the last few months. 8 players have been released from the women's team, including the former England international Jo Potter. So not brilliant news there. Obviously, their seasons have all been completely cut short now, as everyone knows. So just some news to sort of tick off there. Also, I suppose it'll be interesting to know our thoughts on this, guys, is that Michael O'Neill, the Stoke coach, on June the 8th, he was confirmed to have had coronavirus. Billy McKinley, his assistant, took charge of things in the meantime. I don't think this will affect our game too much. I mean, 2 Bundesliga games went ahead without coaches for the first weekend. So, Sim, what's your sort of feeling on the current sort of state of play as these sort of things go on? There was talk as well that a couple of Reading players / coaches had COVID.
Yeah, there was a report in, I think, Get Reading that Lucas Boyer and Michael Gilks had come down with it. It hasn't been confirmed by the club yet. Obviously, very sad if it is true, and hope they get better as soon as possible if it is true. But I think, to be honest, things like this are going to come up over the next couple of weeks. It's not going to be completely smooth sailing. Obviously, we want it all to go off without a hitch. We want the rest of the season to go nice and easily. But there are going to be problems. It's very much unprecedented times at the minute. Everyone's just kind of working out how to get football back properly, and there are going to be problems like this. And obviously, hope Michael O'Neill gets better, and hope Stoke aren't too badly affected by it. But it's these little impromptu problems that are going to come up for the rest of the season.
As a Reading fan, Will, do you let's have the scenario where maybe we do have a couple of games where, someone like George Puskas or Liam Moore, someone really important to the team, is unavailable because of, if they catch coronavirus. Is this something that we are going to be what's the feeling that we're going to have about this? Some fans might be angry that, the game goes ahead. Some fans might be unhappy with the player for catching it for whatever reason. What's your sort of feeling on if that were to happen?
Well, I think unless the reports were to come out that the player had been careless by attending, an illegal rave or something, then I don't think we have to be very careful about putting blame on anyone on catching coronavirus. There is a question on the sporting integrity. If a team suddenly its best players are out because of it, then they'll be less strong. But that happens with injuries anyway. I think. With Reading, we will come on to this. It's less of an issue. I mean, the one that comes to mind is actually not just sort of when people getting coronavirus or the injuries, or is if there's so many games and so many short period, and with the new season starting soon after, there could be a bit of a rotation. So it'd be interesting to see how teams handle that. And you might get teams going for promotion or relegation who might voice sort of complaints about that if they feel some teams are fielding weakened sides.
Yeah, there is that sort of temptation, isn't there, Ollie, to maybe if you have a Saturday, Wednesday, to effectively say, well, Wednesday night games we can play the sort of cup team or half a cup team in each or something. Because, for example, as I say, for the FA Cup games, we did have basically a cup team, didn't we? So is there the temptation for that rotation policy to become sort of a really common fixture now?
I think certainly with the size of the squad that Reading have, I think we've sort of bemoaned it the last couple of years about how big the squad is, but actually sort of for these 9 games, it might become quite a big advance because you say we can almost play 2 different 11s each week, and we saw in the friendly against Chelsea last week where I think we played 2 completely different 11s in each half. So, and from looking at it, for me, they seem to be almost sort of both quite strong. They were sort of mixed and matched and sort of first team players that play quite regularly, with a couple of fringe players in there as well. So yeah, look, the turnaround is going to be tough for each game, especially after having not played for 3 months. It will have been, certainly players will be a little bit rusty, I'd expect. So I know there's a week between after the Stoke game, but then after that it's pretty much 2 games a week. So it is going to take its toll on the players, but with the squad that Reading have, I think we would hope that we'd be able to cope with it pretty well.
Yeah, and on to another piece of Newsbites is that there's the fans in the stands option. For £20, I believe it is, you can put yourself in the stand. Basically, if you've seen, I think Villarreal, Borussia Mönchengladbach are 2 teams that have done this. I think it's a couple of Premier League teams as well, maybe Wolves are doing it, where you can basically purchase a cardboard cutout of yourself, send in a photo in your Reading kit or whatever, and have your picture in the stand, because obviously all the games can be behind closed doors. And you can do that by Wednesday at 5:00 to get it in for the Stoke game. Details are on the Reading FC website. And guys, jump in then if you've bought one already.
I can't say that I have. I've been in 2 minds. It's obviously a very niche idea, and obviously it's a nice little way to for the club sort of to gain some extra revenue. Obviously with no ticket sales. I know Leeds have done it and have proudly sold 15,000 cardboard cutouts for Ellen Road, which of course you would expect from Leeds. But I don't see it. I don't see anything wrong with it. But it's just a nice little way to make money, I suppose.
I like it. I think the thing is that, there's kind of 2 things for me. Is that firstly, would I want to keep the cutout afterwards? Do I want it? It's a bit weird in a way having to have it delivered to you afterwards. But I'm kind of tempted to be like, yeah, that's kind of my cutout. But secondly, I would be tempted to have it in the northeast corner where I usually have my seat. But then that's not going to be on the TV cameras. And in reality, this is kind of largely for the TV cameras. So do we feel like, in that sense, it's kind of difficult to actually, because, are we going to fill 15,000? Probably not. So it's a difficult one, isn't it, Sim, as to whether it's actually going to, it's a really bad thing to do if you only sell 20.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I wonder what it's going to be like for the players, actually, kind of looking around the ground when they're halfway through a game, seeing a horde of cardboard cutouts around the ground. I don't know if that's going to be something that really encourages them during the game or kind of maybe puts them off a little bit, because it'd be a bit of an odd sight, at least in the first match, when they're usually used to seeing thousands of Reading fans in the stands and then looking around and seeing a lot of cardboard cutouts. Maybe it's going to be just a little bit odd at first, and certainly it's going to be odd looking on the highlights for us afterwards. But it's a nice thing, basically. It brings the fans closer to the team, and there's a lot of people out there who are going to be really missing just being able to go to match day, and something they really miss, something they're really used to, and it gives them the opportunity just to feel part of it at a time when hopefully we're not going to have too many worries with anything like relegation or poor form or anything, but just allows fans to be part of hopefully a good end to the season.
I don't know if anyone still saw that actually Aarhus in the Danish league put up giant screens and allowed fans to do Zoom calls into the games, which I don't know if you see the pictures. The last one, the one I saw, was just of a family looking so bored watching the game. I think I'd be more inclined to sort of do that. I personally wouldn't pay for it, but I think it's very much it's a nice idea. If I was a player and particularly a striker scoring goals, there's a good opportunity to do some quite funny celebrations.
Yes, definitely.
The Jamie Curitan famous one of when he scored against Bristol Rovers and did the hands behind his ears, and then at half-time got told off by the police, and that became his celebration. I mean, there can be a lot of sort of hand behind ears and empty stands and shushing, telling the fans to keep quiet. Great opportunities for celebrations. But the question is, if they went into the stand, would they still be eligible for a yellow card?
I think so, yeah, but I would love to see it if they jump in and just, sit on a seat or something and celebrate that way.
Encouragement there. Any Reading players listening, please do get creative with your celebrations.
Yeah, I must say, it's one of the things I probably spend, the whole, if I was a player, sort of feelings and thoughts that we always have, I suppose, amongst fans. It's probably the celebrations is the thing that I spend probably too much time thinking about. What's anyone's thoughts so far on the whole, the virtual sort of crowd noise we've had in La Liga and some Bundesliga games? That, as Will says, that Zoom idea, which I must say I really wouldn't want myself to be zoomed into a game on the big screen while I'm in my living room. And it's also, there's been in La Liga these kind of CGI fans overlaid on the top of the seats, which kind of looks a bit like FIFA 2004, which I'm not a massive fan of. So what can we pick and choose so far that works?
I'm not wholly against the crowd noise. I think if you use it in a correct way and you can sort of control it, then it could work quite well, because sort of watching some of the Bundesliga games without the crowd noise, I think I saw someone on Twitter compare it to like a swimming pool gala. That sort of noise of sort of random talking that you can't really quite pick out what it is, but it's a bit eerie in many ways. And so I think the crowd noise can work in that sense, but for me it sort of has to be controlled crowd noise. So if there is some way of sort of making it get louder when there's a team attacking, or a round of applause when sort of someone makes quite a nice pass, or a huge roar when someone scores a goal, it can work. But we've also sort of seen in some of the Bundesliga games that I've watched that it's just sort of this generic noise that's been pumped in throughout the entire game. So you sort of get these random referees' whistles sort of going off every now and again, and sometimes you sort of hear the ball being kicked when it's not being kicked, because they've clearly just sort of taken this noise directly from another game. Or I think some people are talking about they might take it from FIFA 20 potentially, but I'm not against it, because I think certainly it can make it seem a bit more realistic if you put that noise in correctly. But if you're just going to play generic noise, and it can become sort of quite alienating quite quickly.
I would say in Spanish football, it's been quite understated, which I've kind of liked, and it has had those sort of. I remember they had a player in the Sevilla Real Betis game. I think his shot just went wide, and there was this kind of ooh from the crowd, and it wasn't overbearing, which was quite nice. So
I think that could work. As I said, that sort of thing can work if they can make it realistic, where almost the crowd noise reacts to what's going on the pitch. Then that can work for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. There was we had a tweet go up from Westy, who obviously is one of the podcast guests, who hopefully we'll have back on soon. He was talking to Sim about the potential idea for season ticket holders refusing refunds on the basis that, if you don't necessarily need the money yourself, and the club obviously to some extent does need the money, the season ticket holders are also getting all of the iFollow games for free. For the rest of non-season ticket holders, it's a tenner per game. What do you think, Sim, on the idea of season ticket holders perhaps saying we don't need the money? Obviously, it's case by case. Some people will need it back, but the idea of letting the club keep it as a way of saying, obviously, thanks for what you're doing, and also to keep it a bit more financially stable.
I think as with the cardboard cutout thing, it's just a chance for fans to play their part, basically. It's obviously a very difficult time for the club financially, and I know they're going to want to encourage people softly and gently to not opt for a refund. But there are obviously a lot of fans out there who are going to need the money back, and it's easy for some fans to say, if you're able to let the club keep it, then do. But there are going to be fans out there who are in trouble themselves, who need that extra bit of a financial boost. It's difficult times for everyone at the minute, and there's no shame in wanting a refund. There's no shame in maybe wanting to defer it until next season. Obviously, there's the option of getting some money off your season ticket next season. But I guess if you are in a position to do it, then it will help the club, and it's something that can give the boost. Obviously, there's the option to help the community trust as well. So there's a good range of options for fans to play their part without kind of going out of their way to give up money that they might otherwise need themselves in very difficult times.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a case of the more options the fans have, the more options that suit you and suit the club and everything like that, the better. Well, let's move on to big match preview in a second. Then before that, to round off Newsbites, just to confirm the games that are guaranteed so far. So there are some games that have provisional dates but might be moved for TV. So far, we've had 5 fixtures confirmed with obviously no TV. Teams can be on a maximum of 6 times on television, so it's not going to be the case, as I feared quite early on, that it's just going to be Leeds. It will still be largely that, but slightly less, because every team has 6 maximum games. But Reading, so far, no selections for TV. Obviously, got Stoke on Saturday. Derby away is Saturday, June the 27th at 1 p.m. Brentford then the following Tuesday at 6 p.m. That's at home. Luton away on the first weekend of July. That's at 3 p.m. on the Saturday. And Huddersfield at home the following Tuesday. That's at 6 p.m. So a lot of the midweek games are 6 p.m. kickoffs for Reading at the moment, or so far all of them basically. So if you're as you want to get in from work early, or if you're working from home, obviously, then that's the time to be aware of those games for midweek. But we start at 3 p.m. at the Madstad on this Saturday, June the 20th, and we'll be talking about that now in Big Match Preview.
There's another huge game ahead for the Royals, so be loud and be proud for the Big Match Preview.
Right, there is one key stat to bear in mind here as we take on Stoke, and that is that Stoke have failed to win a competitive football game since early March. That is over 3 months now since Stoke have won a competitive football game. Reading, on the other hand, have not lost in over 3 months. So we are really, the golfing class between the two teams it couldn't be larger. And Sim, what do you make of how we turn up in this game of really much complete unknowns?
Well, I'm pretty confident, to be honest. We haven't conceded a goal in a couple of months, to be honest, and to put together that kind of defensive run over an extended period really does show what work Marc Bowen's done at the club. In all seriousness, I don't really know what to imagine going into the game, to be honest. There's so many different variables going into it. There's so many different things that we can't really predict. Obviously, Stoke have the factor of having to deal with Michael O'Neill having coronavirus, but things like individual player fitness are going to be so vitally important for both sides, and obviously for every side in the division. But that's something that we can't really tell until football gets going. So it's just a lot of unknowns at the minute.
Will, what is your hunch when I tell you that Stoke are one of the worst away sides in the division? They don't tend to score many goals. They're not brilliant at keeping them out. They've only won 4 of their 18 games on the road this year. It feels to me like away form is a bigger indicator of how teams are going to do in this final bit of the season with no fans than home form maybe is.
Well, one thing that I read today was about Millwall were playing Middlesbrough on midweek, and they moved the game to 3 p.m. And the reason for that is to allow Middlesbrough for travel reasons. And it did cross my mind whether England is still struggling with coronavirus, and whether hotels, and that article said that was because hotels aren't opening up, and whether that means that actually Stoke will be travelling down on a bus on Saturday and then driving back after the game, whilst normally they would stay on a Friday. From what I understand is that in Germany teams are still staying in hotels. But if that is the case, that teams are travelling down on the day, then that could have an impact. It's not the best preparation to be on a coach for a long journey beforehand. Though the Bundesliga seems to show that the home form goes out of it. So I don't think it'll have I'm not sure it'll have an impact. Though the travel question is the one that puts me there, and that'd be interesting to see how teams adapt to that.
Yeah, so far Reading have played 2 friendlies in the build-up to this game. I don't think we've got any more planned as we speak on Tuesday night, but we've got so far a 1-0 friendly defeat to Chelsea and a 3-1 win over Portsmouth with Lucas Shaw, Richards and Elise scoring in that. And Olly, It's the $100 million question, isn't it? It's what can you game out of these friendlies? But generally speaking, those two results, on the face of it, having nobody outside the club has watched those games, of course, but on the face of it, those are fine results, aren't they?
Yeah, not bad at all. I think Chelsea then went on to beat QPR 7-1. So our 1-0 defeat to them, looks pretty good in comparison. And obviously the result against Portsmouth, obviously a side who might well be playing Championship football next season, is certainly a good one. But it was great to see, certainly in that Portsmouth game, sort of the three players that scored. Great to see Lucas João back. Obviously spent a long time injured. I think he got injured in the Fulham game on New Year's Day, possibly, and not played since then. So it was great to see, obviously, him back to full fitness and getting a goal, and he could be massive for Reading in these last 9 games. I thought he was a real miss for Reading when he got injured and sort of lacked that presence up front without him there. Omar Richards, great to see him score. I think he's playing more of an advanced role in that friendly, almost left wing, I think. And he scored a goal very similar to the goal he scored against Cardiff in the FA Cup. And so certainly, if we're going to be playing Jordan Abita at left back and Marc Byrne wants to play wingers, then Omar Richards certainly seems to be stating his case on that flank, certainly, and obviously Michael Olly as well. Fantastic young talent, and certainly could play a big role for Reading in these 9 games and beyond. So yes, I think we've gained as much as we could have done out of those 2 games, and playing at the Mailbag as well would have been a great help, sort of getting players acclimatised to playing at the stadium with no fans. So yeah, I think Reading have done pretty well in these 2 games to get what they could out of them.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think Abita was left wing for the very small amount of clips I saw from the Chelsea game. It looked like Abita was the more advanced one for the Chelsea one, and as you say, Richards for the Portsmouth one. It appears so. That sort of tactical flexibility, I think, is welcome. A couple of players we wouldn't have seen. We did have Tom McIntyre back from that, who was injured before, just before the shutdown came in, and Andy Yeardom, I think, is out as well. Sim, as another player that we didn't see in that all those 2 friendlies, as far as I'm aware, is Danny Loader, and it looks like he is pretty much on the way out now.
Yeah, just looking through the limited footage we've had there, looks like no Loader, no Yeardom, and it's kind of interesting to see who is involved and who isn't at the minute, because there's a fair number of players who have been involved who are due to leave the club at the end of the season, or rather the end of June, I should say, whether they've got a loan deal expiring or their contract expiring. But we've still been playing people like Miazga, Pele, Charlie Adam, McCleary, Gunter in these last 2 friendlies, and it's with that in mind, it is interesting that Loader's not there. It maybe suggests he's got a move lined up already, possibly. That he's going to head off to a new club at the end of June when his contract runs out. But certainly it suggests that we've got players that we want to use over these remaining 9 games, people like Gunter and McCleary, and perhaps suggests we're going to give him a new contract into next season, because we do have other options in these positions, particularly, say, in defence. We don't have to play Gabriel Osho. I know he's out of contract and he looks like he's being a backup right back at the minute for Gunter, but we are making that choice to involve these players and to give them game time, and it perhaps suggests that we're going to give them that opportunity to, at the very least, try and impress over the remaining 9 games and maybe earn an unexpected new deal.
Well, it does appear that Tyler Blackett, as he played in the Chelsea game, is another one that at the very least players can agree temporary extensions. They've got until the 23rd of June to agree to those, and Reading, I'm sure they wouldn't be playing those players in the friendlies unless they knew they were going to sign those extensions at the very least, and kind of puts pay to the idea, perhaps if that's going to be the case, that Blackett had signed a pre-contract agreement with a Turkish club that had been reported. It's also been reported that Danny Loader's contract offer for a long-term deal worth about £10,000 a week has been withdrawn from Reading Football Club. So whether that's the case, it certainly appears to be sort of heading that way. So Will, where does that leave us in terms of a starting 11 roughly put together then for the Stoke game? What sort of lineup are you wanting to see?
Oh, that's a tough question. if I'm just looking at the lineup against Birmingham, I don't know how much that influences. Normally you keep the winning side, but looking at that, Yerdon we know is out of that lineup. I mean, the questions of how you approach the remaining games, I think that no one's going to argue that we start off playing our strongest team possible. I think once you get into sort of the fourth or fifth games, and the reality is we're not going to reach the playoffs and we're probably safe, then I think you start to rotate the squad around. There's a question of, is it worth playing loanees or players out of contract who are leaving? Do you give youngsters a game? For me, it's about keeping players fresh. We don't want to get anyone to get injured. If we're mid-table, we're not going up, we're not going down. Let's start preparing for next season. There could be a quick turnaround to the next season. The players might well be playing with no proper break until May next year. We should take that into account, and then maybe loanees who are leaving, we use that to literally just give rests to players who are going to play more long term. In terms of the out of contract players, I think you've already said it. If they've got a deal lined up, then they're not going to play, and I've got no problem with that. The ones who are playing are still putting themselves in the shop window. They might try and impress Reading, or they're just trying to sign or someone else.
Yeah, well, the thing is with whether we play young players or take it, how you can call it how seriously we take the last few games. The thing I have noted from the sort of Bundesliga form guide, basically from what's happened, is that teams who are out of form going into the break, and those teams that are more reliant on their home form, are those that struggle in the last bit of the season, basically. And if we're going into championship teams for that, you can look at Fulham, Preston, Millwall, Derby, Stoke, Huddersfield, Middlesbrough, just some teams that are really reliant on their home form. Those that were in poor form going into the game, or going into the break rather, Brentford, Bristol City, Sheffield Wednesday, Birmingham, Hull, Middlesbrough, all were in poor form. So those guys if you can categorise them as potentially going to struggle, then that would fit the narrative, as it were. Reading are better away than at home, just factually speaking, and they've won 3 of 5 going into the break. So it feels like in a way that could leave us in a nice position. So something to bear in mind. I'm not saying that means you're going to go into the playoffs. Funnily enough, that is one of the questions coming up now. So let's go into the mailbag and hear from yourselves.
Keep up to date with all things Reading FC. Follow the Tilehurst End on Facebook and Twitter.
Right then, Seth opens up the mailbag this week and he asks, is it more important to finish the season strongly and in doing so solidify a professional approach within the squad, or to start the groundwork for next season by giving players like Winamota and Elise more minutes over players that are unlikely to be here, such as Pele? Now, Will, I suppose you've just kind of given your 2 cents on that, and am I right in saying you're pretty much favouring going long term?
Yes. Not starting with the Stoke game. Let's hit it strongest team and trying to get a few wins on the belt. And I'm going to be honest. You'll ask the question later. I'm not hopeful of where I think we are just mid-table, but let's start it with the right approach. But I'm very, very keen that to sort of rotation and give players the chance. And if someone's not going to be in the squad next season, then let's give someone else some game times. Mentioning Winamota, who hasn't played as much as maybe we might have expected, and Elise, who has just started to sort of break into the team and being regular. I'd be keen to see more of them than players who aren't going to be here next season.
Olly, at what point do you think, presuming that things go on pretty normal and that Reading are pretty mid-table and we, nothing goes massively up or down, at what point do you think it's fair to say, okay, Pele, you're not going to be here next season if we don't think he's going to be here next season? We're done with you. We are just going to play younger players. We are just going to play the players that we know are going to be here. At what point do you think it's reasonable to sort of make that transition?
Well, firstly, I think I'd say that we could. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Pele did stay next season. If I'm honest, I think he's certainly someone we should be looking at in the summer to try and sign permanently. Should come relatively cheap, I would say. Probably not out of our price range. I mean, it depends what sort of budget they're going into the summer with, but he'd certainly be a player based on his performances before the lockdown that we should be trying to sign in the summer. But yeah, it's tough at the moment. I'd agree with Will in the sense that you can't take your foot off the gas straight away, and I think a lot's been said. I think Marc said it quite a lot, that you've got to start fast in these sort of 9 games, and it is being described as sort of a mini tournament in many ways. And I'm not saying that Reading are going to get to the playoffs, but the run-in is fairly kind for Reading. I think the only team in the top 6 we play is Brentford. So there's still plenty to play for in these games. And I think certainly if you sort of give it the attitude that these games don't really matter, then it's probably sort of the wrong message to send to the players, because they might feel as if the games don't matter themselves. They're not going to try as hard or whatever. Where there's still plenty of points to play for, and really not. I want to see Reading finish as high as possible. It probably won't be the playoffs, but certainly I'd rather be looking up the table than down. Sort of, there probably isn't going to be that much of a break between the end of this season and the start of the new one. So momentum might be a bit more important than it normally would be. I think it might perhaps be sort of a 4-week break max. So it's not going to kill sort of momentum completely. So I'd certainly, for the first sort of 5-6 games of this mini tournament, if you like, really go for it, and then sort of reassess. But there's still plenty of points to play for. So I wouldn't be taking it easy quite just yet.
Well, just to remind ourselves where we are, Reading are 8 points behind 6th place Preston in the playoffs. We are 12 points. I think that is. 12 points behind Nottingham Forest, who are 5th. So it is really only one place that I suppose we can be talking about with 9 games left to play. Then we're 9 points clear of Charlton in that bottom or that final relegation spot. So, 3 defeats starts us off with a pretty terrible position, really, especially with Stoke being one of the teams below us, if that does happen. So there's plenty to take seriously. And I think that, I'm kind of for the idea of heavy rotation and keeping things fresh and keeping things moving. I think we've shown with the FA Cup campaign this year that this team is capable of doing that, as long as everyone understands their roles, knows their roles, and the tactics are pretty straightforward, which generally speaking they are. Then I think we've got a good chance of being okay with that. Holder1329 tweets us saying, do you think that the depth in Reading's squad can help to boost promotion hopes? Sim, the idea of promotion hopes feels a bit much at the moment, but do you think that maybe we are in a way kind of uniquely benefiting or uniquely well positioned at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. As we said earlier, Reading have got a really strong squad, plenty of strength in depth, and something that's been a problem in previous years but could be a real asset this year. And what's more, it's not just depth for the sake of it. Basically, you can go back into previous years and find plenty of players who are basically very disillusioned with the club, who don't really want to be there, who are basically just driftwood. Basically, you go back to, say, the 18-19 season when we were excluding, say, Myler, McNulty, Edwards, and other players from the first team. We don't really have that at the minute. There's not really too many players that I would say don't want to be here. Maybe Danny Loader, who looks like he's still got a good career ahead of him and can probably go on to a good club at the end of his contract. But otherwise, it's a squad with plenty of depth, but also plenty of motivation, plenty of morale as well, and plenty of cohesion. And when you do have a squad like that, you can rotate heavily. Obviously, we're allowed 5 subs for the remainder of the season rather than 3, and that could be a really big factor within games for us if we're able to bring on an extra bit of attacking talent or defensive solidity. That could pay dividends basically from the first game, not just as the season goes on, but quite early. From Marc Bowen's point of view, obviously, though, he's got to balance that. And when you do have a lot of opportunities for players to play with those extra substitutions, you've got to make sure it's going to players who need it and deserve it. So it's going to be a unique challenge for him as well. So I'll be interested to see how he deals with it.
Yeah, next up, Jack Killick asks, do you think that there being no fans being at the Medeski Stadium will help improve our home form for the rest of the season after it has been so poor up until now? Only one team in the Championship has lost more home games than us this season. That's Hull. Reading 21st in the overall form table for home games over the course of the season. And that, I don't think it will help improve our home form, but because it's not going to make us better. I don't think the fans do detrimental things to the team. It's the question of whether it can neutralise things to an extent that maybe some way benefits us. But I must say, I think it's more, Ollie, I think it's more when we're away that we'll feel the benefit of this. I'm not sure that Reading's home games will particularly feel like we're a better team.
Yeah, I think one thing we've seen in the Bundesliga is that I've not got the exact figures to hand, but there's been a massive drop off in sort of the percentage of home wins. So there's a question over whether having no fans makes a difference, and it's proven to have that impact in the Bundesliga, where it's much more of a level playing field now, and that home advantage isn't really felt by either team. So it's going to be a strange scenario for Reading, but I think home games will feel like away games, and away games will feel like home games. It'll be hard sort of to tell the difference between the two. So I'd agree. I don't think you can really say that having no fans is going to improve the form, because you say the fans aren't having a negative impact. But I think it will certainly sort of make it much more of a sort of a level playing field.
Yeah, and Will, we've picked up 25 points away from home this season and 23 from home. Just speaking aside from the sort of situation we're in at the moment, but why do you think that is? Why are we just better away from home?
Oh, so that's a tough question. I mean, maybe it's way we're set up as a team, or how teams set up against us. One of the things that came through in the Bundesliga games was that home teams were played at a bit of a slower pace, and there was sort of some criticism of, without fans being there urging teams to get forward, there was more sideways passing. So you can maybe, there's less need to sort of rush your play, and and away teams tend to sort of sit back and have less possession. So maybe that might actually help us in that sense, because with the home games, we would normally feel the urge to maybe sort of go a bit more quicker going forward. The opposition might sit back. It becomes a bit more. It's a neutral, isn't it? Yes, you've got the advantage of your own stadium, but there is an element of sort of the psychology, I guess, of the fans being behind you, of urging you going forward. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think you said, it might be actually benefit us, the fact that we are good away from home.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be better for us when we go away. But for the moment, I'm not sure there's going to be any benefit or any change really in terms of home form, because we already play like the fans don't help in a way. And if we are one of the worst teams in the league in home games, and we are still benefiting from our fans, then God knows what it'll be like without them. I suppose we will find out. That's the question. That's the fact, isn't it? We will find out, and it's going to be one way or another. Certainly. Scott from the States asks, since we aren't going to be on Sky, how can Reading generate revenue without fans at matches? Are these 9 games going to make our financial situation even worse? I think the fact of the matter is yes, our financial situation has got worse. These 9 games, we have to pay appearance fees, we have to pay players who have deferred their wages. Kudos on that, by the way, we've not mentioned it yet. 3 months worth of wages deferred by both the players and the coaching staff, management staff. But it is going to make our financial situation worse, because we have to do the logistics, we have to pay the goal bonuses, we have to pay, etc. All the associated costs. In terms of the club generating more revenue, I just think that we've kind of maxed out for the moment in terms of what we can get with the fans in the stand kind of idea, with the photo cutouts, with the iFollow. You can't charge really any more than £10 for a game, and I think that is kind of reasonable as well, so fans can't really complain that it's too much. And after that, I think the only thing that really the club is going to be able to do is, if we're in the playoffs, or if we're in a massive relegation battle, is to somehow, if there is one game which we need to do well in, and maybe there's slightly less of a coronavirus affliction in the end of the season, towards the end of July, maybe we can do something around that and do a big screen in the Medeski Stadium with massive social distancing or something. But until then, I really don't think there's too much we can do. Jack Simmons asks, who are the 2 players you think will lose this summer? Who are the 2 players you want to lose this summer? We don't need to do 2 each, I think. But guys, what's some names to throw out there that we think will be going in the summer?
I'd imagine most of the out-of-contract players will be off. I've said for a while now that I can't see a scenario where Danny Loader stays next season. I think we were a bit silly in not allowing him to go to Wolves last summer, but I think he'll definitely be off this summer, and I'd imagine most of the other out-of-contract players will be off as well, unless they can sort of agree wage caps. Because I think, simply put, we can't afford to keep the likes of Gareth McCleary and Chris Gunter on at the club on the wages they're on. So I'd expect most of the out-of-contract players to go. I'd be hesitant to say we might have to sell one of sort of the star names. I know Nigel Howe's mentioned it before that we are going to have to potentially sell before we buy this summer because the financial situation is still a bit precarious. So whether that means someone like John Swift is sold or George Puskas goes to Turkey, where there's been a lot of links to him there. I think it all depends on sort of how much the club are going to need that money, because if they do, then it might be a scenario where we are sort of forced to sell one of those players to sort of make sort of £5-10 million.
It'd be a real dark day if Jordan Abit has to go. Longest serving player. If we let Tyler Blackett go, which I imagine we will, then that'll be 2 left backs. If we have Abita and Richards, it'll only be 1 if we have only Richards. Can't imagine he'll get loads and loads of offers. So I'd imagine of all the out of contract players, Will, he's the one that I'd imagine is going to stay.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think, as Olly said, that most of the out of contract players will leave, and if you still got, say, someone like Chris Gunter, is he really going to want to sign up to be backup to Yerdom? I mean, he's got he wants to be getting in the Wales squad for the Euros, which has been but for a year. He's not going to get in the Wales squad if he's back up at Reading for another year. So that'll be on his mind. I expect that we could see quite a turnover of players going out. And there are a few players who are on long-term contracts. Someone like Marc McNulty. He didn't even set the Hibs light at Hibs when he went back in January. We've still got him for another year, and there are probably 1 or 2 other, Sam Baldock, for example, on high wages. So yeah, I think we'll be seeing a fair few out, and maybe we might not see that many players coming in.
No, I really don't think we will, to be fair. And I think that's the temptation with Chris Gunter, is always just to give him another year if he wants it. Because, Sim, I think Andy Yerdom is going to come in for a lot of bids. And I think these are the sort of players that aren't going to be worth, you can never, as a championship club like Reading, say we want £15 million for our right back, no matter how good he is. And I think he is a quite underrated player in terms of his off-the-field contributions to the club. Obviously, fans are never going to know truly, but I think the fact he's vice captain or one of the vice captains, and I think he's actually a really key player to the team. But because of that, because he's good, because he's attacking, because he's technical, he is going to be, and I think because he's also good value. If you need a right back, what are you going to say? Like £3-4 million? Premier League teams who need a right back could afford that this summer, probably still. It could make the difference for us in terms of us, God knows what, and staying afloat. Players like Andy Yerdom are going to become a bit more sought after in this market, I think.
Yeah, I think he's the kind of player that Premier League teams, or at least upper end championship teams, are going to look at and say, this is a really good player. This is a really good player on and off the pitch who we can get for not a particularly huge amount of money. This is the kind of market where they should be able to pick up some not complete bargains, but players certainly come in for less money than they would get in other summer transfer windows. Reading can't really afford to stand their ground as much as they can. On Gunter, I'd like to see us keep him if we can. Will makes a good point about whether or not Gunter's going to really try and push into the Wales squad next year. But from Reading's point of view, if he is happy to stay as a backup, he'd be a really big boost for us. He's an experienced player. He knows the club really well. He's good example to younger players. He's versatile. So if we can persuade him to stay on terms that are beneficial to us, I'd like to see that happen.
And Loyal Royal asks one of the penultimate question of this week, and he asks, the optimism, isn't it? Is there a chance we could win every match and go up, or make the playoffs? At least we wouldn't have to go to Wembley for another final defeat, which is true. And I want each of you three, can I get a out of 10 playoff indicator for where we sit now. What's your kind of out of 10 ambitions for us finally, making that push into the playoffs?
6 out of 10, maybe, out of push.
6? That's high.
It is high, but it's optimistic. But I think you look at the run-in, as I say, it's not a bad run-in at all. As I say, Brentford, the only top 6 team we've got left to play. And, we've still got the likes of who else? We've got Luton left to play, Charlton. They're both sort of struggling down the bottom. It's not a bad run of games. I don't think we will get the playoffs, but I'd rather be looking up the table come the end of the season rather than looking down. And I would hope, based on our fixture list, that we could, not get to the playoffs, but certainly, move a few places higher.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there with Ollie, and I'm going to put my 1 out of 10 being a 2. I mean, points per game has been used in Scotland for League 1 and League 2, and if we do that for the Championship, and we know it's far from perfect, then Preston would get 69.6 points. So Reading would need 70 points. That's 7 wins and 1 draw from our remaining 9 games. Now, Reading fans have, in 2012 when we won the promotion, so we have done it before, but I can't see us sort of switching it on. The positive side is that if you use the points per game to sort of guide how it goes on, Charlton would reach 48.4 points, but we're already on 48, so we're safe. But I don't see us going up. For me, the aim needs to be to finish in the top half of the table. That for me is the aim. We've been in the bottom half for too many years, and since we got relegated, that's sort of a good starter. Let's finish in the top of the table. If we win 3 games in a row, things might change. But at the moment, 2 out of 10 for me.
5 out of 10 for me. Actually, I think there's no real pressure on us at the minute. There's no real kind of massive onus on us to get into the top 6. There's no real imminent threat of relegation, and it's all about how the players respond to that. You look back at the 15-16 season when we were mathematically not too far away from the top 6 for a lot of the season, but the mentality really seemed to shift later on in the season when players who were leaving the club at the end of the season thought, right, I've had enough of this. I can't really be bothered to put in much effort. And I hope that's not the case for the rest of the season. I really don't, but it's a possibility. You look at people like Pele and Miazga. I'm not saying they're lazy players or anything, but they might look at that and think, you know what, if we're not going to get into the top 6, I'm not going to put in quite as much effort as I would otherwise if there was a really good opportunity to get into the top 6. And again, that's something we can only really tell after a couple of games, but it's certainly a possibility, but an outside possibility at best.
Yeah, and sat here now, I think 3 out of 10 for the playoffs and 1 out of 10 for relegation. And Marc, look, we're going to keep going around and getting some more predictions to finish off the show there. Marc Lawrence is saying 9-game season predictions. Where do you think, not where you want, where do you think Reading will come in terms of your actual position? Reading are 14th now. I am going to say that we are going to land in a nice, cosy 11th place. Will, do you want to start us off with your official landing point?
I think we will finish 12th. So we'll just sneak in of my my ambition and aim to finish in the top half of the table.
Ollie, what do you think?
10th, maybe. As I say, I think we've got a good chance of putting a nice little run together come the end of the season. But I'm sure other teams will fancy their chances as well. I know Millwall have got a very good run. I don't think they've got many of the top 6 teams left to play. So, I'm optimistic, but not too optimistic to think that we'll get to the playoffs. So I'll say 10th probably.
Sim, are you going to dare to go into single figures?
I'm tempted, but just for parity's sake, I'm going to go 11th, right between Ollie and Will in 10th and 12th. I think that's about where we're going to finish. We've got enough in the tank to get a few more points to push up the table, but it's going to take a lot to really push up. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near 7 wins, as Will mentioned earlier. Maybe we've got enough for 3 or 4, but if you don't add on a few more wins on top of that, then there's not really too much chance of us getting there. And of course, there's other teams that are going to look at the top 6 hungrily as well and think they've got an outside chance of getting in there. Maybe if we'd won 1 or 2 extra games in the period before lockdown, we'd have had a chance. But I think we're just a little bit too far away.
Yeah, fair enough. And to finish off the show then, let's go into the Stoke game and get some predictions for that game. Just to remind you, we do have a prediction league going. I'm keen to stress that because I'm winning it. And we'll be reviving it for the rest of the season, of course. Current standings, just to refresh your memory. Handbag's back on 14 points. Westy, 15. Olly, you're on 16. Wim is on 17. Sim, you're on 22, just ahead of Johnny, who's on 19. And then myself on 31 points. And with that in mind, I am going to say, I think these games, largely speaking, looking across the divisions that have started so far, have been pretty low scoring for the first weekend back at the very least. So I'm going to say 1-0 to Reading for the first game back. Olly and Sim, as you're in the league, let's have yours next.
I was going to go with the same thinking, actually. I had 1-0 in my mind. So I won't defer from that. I've not got much to play for. I'm probably still going to try and avoid finishing at the bottom, but I'll go 1-0 as well.
I'll go with 2-2. I think it's going to be a game where it's going to kind of ebb and flow a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how teams react to goals, because obviously without home fans or away fans, there's not going to be that immediate boost. But I think it's a game that's going to end up level at 2-2.
Will, what do you reckon for this one?
I'm optimistic and go for 2-0 Reading.
Brilliant. Well, that draws to a close our hopefully fantastic return. Episode 225 in the bag, just over 3 months after episode 224. So all that's left for me to do is thank these 3 intrepid Reading fans who've been, waiting for this week for probably a long time, as I have. And it's been brilliant to have a crowded podcast room on this evening. So thanks to all of you for popping on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And you'll be hearing more from Olly and Sim on the Tilehurst website as the weeks go on for the rest of the season. And if we can tempt Will into doing a TV review for us, then we'll certainly be grabbing him for that. Please join us in just over a week's time, or just under a week's time, actually, as we set here on Tuesday night after the Stoke game. We'll be back into the swing of things, of course, back to some sort of regularity with the podcast. Luckily, we're always socially distanced on this podcast. People don't want to come near us anyway, so it's pretty straightforward for doing that. Thank you very much for persevering with us over the break. Thank you very much for listening to the interviews and following the social media and the website, and still logging on, checking out, seeing what we're writing about, even when there is not very much to write about, to be frank. And hopefully now we can settle back into our armchairs and our sofas and become those things that we always lament, and that's the couch fan for those of us who get down to the mad side on a regular basis. And once again, we can say, as we pull into a strange old summer, come on you R's.